Hello, hello, everybody. Welcome to. I like your split second decision. Should I stay or should I go? One of you made the right choice. The other ones, I don't know about that. Hello, and welcome to Making Art with JavaScript and Garbage. Hi. Yes! We may be a small crowd, but we're a mighty crowd. Thank you. My name is Colleen Lavin. I'm the lead developer advocate at Particle, a hardware company. We make, it got stuck in my pocket, but we make connected microcontrollers, and I just like to make things, and that's what this talk is about. I love having a project. I don't understand what to do with myself if I do not have a project. I really love starting projects, by the way. I'm not always the biggest fan of finishing them. My garage is in a constant state of chaos. It's a graveyard of all of my past brief fascinations. But what can I say? I love to make stuff, and I've always been really fascinated by the intersection of art and technology, where they meet, how that started, and how I can do it. And so one thing about me, ooh, hello. See, they may be loud, but we're growing by the numbers. We almost doubled the audience size right there. Bet they can't say that next door. Seriously, I appreciate you all sticking around after the space talk to listen to me talk about art. You're wonderful. But I love art. I love making things. And this is an odd time right now where you're meeting me because I'm fresh off of a full run, my first ever full run at the Edinburgh Fringe, where I made a project that kind of explored the intersection of art and technology. So for those of you who don't know the Edinburgh Fringe, it's the largest art festival in the world, and it's an absolutely ridiculous marathon event where you have to do a show every day for a month. Yeah, you guys are meeting me after I've gotten my voice back. Didn't have a microphone for most of these shows, by the way. Also, none of the rooms in Edinburgh are air conditioned. Well, at least none of the ones I was in. And then they're packed to triple the capacity. But anyway, what I was doing there actually was relevant to this talk. I'm not just bragging hey, I got my voice back. This is my sworn enemy. His name is Murderbot, and he was the centerpiece of my show. The show was called Do the Robots Think I'm Funny? And throughout the course of the show, Murderbot would listen to the audience reaction and react in real time, judging me on whether or not he thought that the audience thought that I was funny during that time. He would also heckle me. I also do not know why I did that to myself, in case you were wondering. Still no clue. Probably doesn't say great things about my self-esteem that that's what I decided to do with my August. But it was fun. And doing that, though, made me think of art and code a lot, constantly. Because wherever I went, people were asking me about it as I begged them all to come see my show, which apparently is a very ineffective method of getting people to see your show, by the way, in case you were wondering. But while researching it, I came across this quote from John Lasseter: "Art challenges technology, and technology inspires the art." And I'm not going to speak to Lasseter's character as a person. I know he's problematic, but I really liked this quote. I really do. And I've been thinking about this a lot. I've been thinking about the state of art because the state of art, at least lately, has been constantly linked with the state of technology. It feels like I cannot go outside. Okay, I cannot turn on my computer without hearing about how AI is affecting art, how art is effectively dead, how all of that is true. And I just don't really believe it. I believe that people want us to believe that art is dead, and I believe that there's a lot of art that people will try and claim is excellent art. But while thinking about this, while letting this quote haunt my everyday, while being constantly berated by a robot, I wrote this talk. So I just wanted to give you that backstory for some of this because it comes off a little cynical in parts. All right. But it's also overall fairly helpful. So computer art goes back to the dawn of computers itself, and the earliest known record of computer art is obviously Microsoft Paint in Windows 95. No, that is a complete lie. Do not quote me on that. Computer art actually started in the late 1950s. But the earliest memory a lot of us probably have, actually I think some of you are younger than me, the earliest memory I have of computer art is Microsoft Paint. Going into the computer lab at school and just having any time at the end of class that would be spent drawing on Microsoft Paint, just making really weird lines, using the computers as another means to create something purely hideous, like every single time, but something nonetheless. Like my big thing was there was a cutout tool, and if you cut it out, you could then fill it with more color, and it looked completely deranged at the end. But oh, it was fantastic. And while thinking about art in general, I've been thinking about computer art, but I've also been thinking about generative art. So generative art sort of takes the person out of it to an extent. You've probably heard of generative AI, and we'll cover that a little bit later, but generative art is a little bit more than that. It uses algorithms to create unique pieces that often involve randomness, but also often involve human interaction and change every time that you interact with them. Artists will set these guidelines to steer their creation, and it results in this piece of art that is never actually finished, that's constantly in flux and motion, that can lead to you never seeing the same breathtaking beauty or objective piece of horror ever again. And it can be truly wonderful. It also kind of challenges what creativity is, because sure, a person makes it, but a lot of it is randomness. And I'm not going to go pure into what art is, though there was a version of this that did have the Googled definition of that, and then I decided not to subject all of us to that. Here are some examples of generative art. And they're pieces of beauty, they're random chaos, they're autonomous creations that helped create themselves, but were created by people as well. And that is the thing about generative art, which is also called algorithmic art. It's the math creates the art here. Like the randomness can take the wheel and create the beauty, create the weirdness, create something that no matter how you define art, some of these things are hard to look away from. Some of these things would be at home in a museum, and some are. In many cases, artists realize that math and randomness lead to beauty. Also, sometimes people make robots that do it too. This is an extremely blurry picture that looked a lot less blurry on my screen, but it's a picture of a drawing bot that someone programmed to just draw with a Sharpie and make chaos, which is a very fun robotics project for kids and also for me. Like back when I was starting hardware, I used to teach at computer camp, and nothing gets like 13-year-olds more excited about learning code than the chance to just play with a Sharpie and make squiggles with a robot. Like, it's ridiculously fun. You can sneak in a bunch of concepts about math and pushing things to like flashing the code. You can sneak in a lot of lessons about how to use a motor, and it makes them like actually learn C++ without hating you too much. So amazing. It also kind of reminds me of this toy from the 90s. Spin art, a lot of generative art does kind of remind me of spin art because the machine does a lot of the work, but the person has to interact with it. And also the results do look very similar because of the sheer randomness involved in it. Okay, so what about AI? Yes. It's 2023, so I do think I'm legally obligated to mention AI in my tech conference talk. I hear the penalty is death if I don't, so we're stuck with it. So, generative AI is the generative art you've probably heard most about lately. And honestly, like a lot of people, I have very mixed feelings on it. Like, on one hand, I think it's kind of fun that I can type in a few words and make this. On the other hand, the ethical implications are pretty creepy. This was trained on someone's life's work, and they didn't really consent to that, so that's not great. I also think that the ability to fake images is really creepy. So, back to my show, my main like marketing tactic used generative art because I realized that shouting at people, "See my show, please," did not work. So instead, I would stop them on the street and ask if they could tell which picture of me was real. Both of the backgrounds are Midjourney, but one of the pictures is a real picture of me, and the other picture is a creepy AI version of me. And this, by the way, is a really good way to get strangers to insult you to your face. I like just last week, a woman came up and pointed at the one that was an actual picture of me and said, "The eyes on her are just wrong." Great compliment. I had to lie to her and tell her that she got it right because I knew, like, she was a very nice woman. She's like, I don't think she would have felt very good if I told her that she had just insulted me to my face. But in case you're wondering, the creepy Steve Jobs one is the fake. You got it right. So, yeah. Like generative art right now, the place that it is largely AI related. That's the term of the moment. The technology's very cool. The ethics behind it are hit or miss. Well, mostly just miss, honestly. The projects we'll mostly be talking about don't use generative AI, but you could, if you were so inclined. There's a lot of tutorials out there for learning how to use it, and there's some pretty cool APIs to look at. But let's go back to before everyone was talking about AI. Let's go back to pre-Microsoft Paint. Let's go back to the beginning of time itself. And by that, I mean when computers were invented and people started using them for art. Because, come on, was there really a real world before computers existed? Like, I don't know. I recently found out I'm the same age as website. And that tracks to me because my world did begin with the internet. But computers do have this innate desire to create things. And throughout history, whenever technology advances, so do new methods of creation. Einstein said that I didn't put in the dictionary quote, but I did have to put in Einstein, so it's either one or the other. You've got to do one. I don't make the rules. I just am hopelessly unoriginal with the execution of them. But I do love this quote from Einstein. When you reach a certain level of technical skill, science and art tend to coalesce in aesthetics, plasticity, and form. The greatest scientists become artists as well. And I know he wasn't actually talking about this, but when we reached, because that quote, by the way, was in like 1928, way before computers and art existed, but it made me think of it when I was looking at this. So the first works recognized as digital art, recognized as any sort of computer art, have their origins in approaches to photography. Early 1950s artists, well, actually late 1950s, early computer artists working in the late 1950s used photography to explore processes that were not visible to the human eye. This is one of the earliest digital artworks. It was created by a mathematician named Ben Leposky using an oscilloscope to manipulate electric signals and photograph them in the shape of waves. Like, he used them not in the way we typically think of computer art, but honestly, I thought it was too cool not to include. And it also brings us to some of the first things that actually resemble what we do. So this is one of the first drawing machines ever created. It was created by Desmond Paul Henry. He created it in 1961 using an adapted computer, a bomb-site computer, and he would make this machine-generated artwork. It was the first machine-generated artwork that was ever shown in galleries. He's considered the pioneer for computer art in general, and he started this, but so many others followed. In the 60s alone, most of the individuals in the 60s alone, computer art went from something that only a few people did to something that a fair amount did, but still not everyone. Still, overall, the people making this were pretty much only engineers and scientists because nobody actually had access to computers unless they were engineers, scientists, or probably really rich people too. The Elon Musks of those times, but hopefully with less divorce guy energy. But a lot of them started exploring it pretty early on. And now this was the first drawing machine, or this is a property of it, but here's a really cool one that I like. So in the later 60s, there were more collaborations between artists and programmers in general, and Veramire, whose name I am almost certainly mispronouncing, collaborated with mathematicians and programmers to create these arts using room-sized computers and plotter printers that moved across a surface in weird movements. And they did this to create these scratches and geometric designs like that were influenced by Art Deco. And Molnar herself was a self-taught programmer, which, by the way, in the 60s, there was no YouTube in the 60s, in case you were wondering. It was almost impossible to self-learn this stuff, and she self-taught with no actual institutional knowledge and made it to this. She made it to museums herself, to becoming a foundational hero in computer art. She had her works acquired by prestigious institutions and laid the foundation for what we do now call algorithmic art, which just we didn't call for years and years. And then came the 1970s, where it starts to resemble a lot more like what we see today. This does kind of look like that screen that used to play at the beginning of VHS tapes. But more artists came together and they expanded the boundaries of computational art in their own way. They were influenced by so many of the works of people that came before them, but they used newer computers to create the designs themselves. They made purely digital art instead of using the computers just to plot it on a printer. They made things that just that just existed on these screens. And they also developed the first computer programmed drawing machine. Uh, Aaron, like fully computer programmed. And then they teamed up to do that. By the way, they teamed up with Stanford's artificial intelligence lab. They made that the the approach right there up there, a computer generated color photograph. They did this ridiculous stuff. They explored the new possibilities that were offered by cheaper TVs at the very least and slightly more available computers. And at least at this point, a lot of universities had them. And they were anticipating that the future would be these machines. And oh, they wanted to create stuff. They wanted to create this beauty in a world that, honestly, we could say it, we could do way better now. But you can always do way better in the future. And then came the 80s and everything kind of exploded. Even Warhol did digital art. Computers were much easier. They weren't just at universities. They were still for the wealthy, but they were somewhat attainable for the only slightly wealthy. It was not unheard of for a public library to have a computer. People would actually get them. And also the term digital art actually started being used, and every art, it was back then what AI is kind of now, but less obnoxious about it because they didn't have the internet to hear it constantly. You would just hear news anchors talking about how the computer is going to replace art, and also D&D is turning your kids into Satanists. Like, same sentence, usually. At least in my imagination it is. But in the 80s and 90s, computers shrunk, so they were a lot smaller. They were considered very portable because even laptops existed. And by that I mean you could carry around a computer that weighed like roughly the same weight as my dog, who I would not consider particularly portable. She's 40 pounds. But still, I suppose the computers were probably more pro being carried around than my dog, though. But when the web launched, that accelerated the trend. It connected users globally. It fostered these artist communities. And this increased accessibility marked a turning point for digital art because art shouldn't just be made by the wealthy. The tools were now a lot more available. And then from the 90s to today, it became something that we could all access. It became something that wasn't gated off. The movement was so popularized with the emergence of digital media that we've all seen it. We've had clip art, we've had everything. Probably most of us spent our lives staring at screen after screen at computer generated art, just taking for granted the fact that this existed. And in the 2000s, in the 2010s, it became even more interactive and accessible because there was open source software like processing, created by UCLA professor Casey Reese. I mean, it allowed audience interaction. It allowed us to really engage with art. And even now, there's newer technologies that have come into play, pushing the boundaries of the genre. Like machine learning, AI, even the dreaded NFTs have made it. Look, I'll a little bit defend AI, but I'm not even going to pretend to defend NFTs. Dear God, no. But they did. Honestly, I will defend them in one way, which is they fleeced a lot of really stupid rich people out of money, which we can all support that, I suppose. Probably not worth the environmental impact. Like, they should have just started another scam. Like, just sell them essential oils. Like, But I digress. Like, I can respect a good scam. I just can't respect that scam because it's not a good scam. If it burns a rainforest, I'm not going to respect it. But anyway, I digress. Look, we're at 9 o'clock at night. I'm going to go off script a little. Anyway, we've talked about the history, and now we're going to look at some art that exists today. Some cool stuff built by normal people that we could all theoretically build ourselves. Some stuff that I personally just find cool and wanted to find an excuse to show you. So this is one of my favorites. This is my friend Mohit builds these hardware sculptures that are about yay big, if that. Like, they're around the size. They're like half of this and built with using this sort of technology. And they're these functional pieces of computer. For this one, it's a mini weather station. But his thing has been making them look like space rovers, making them absolutely beautiful when they could just be ugly boxes. And then there's other stuff too, other amazing art. It's not all hardware. For instance, it's Kate Compton. She made this amazing generative flower garden that it moves and you can also replant. So you get different flowers every time. And they're all these ridiculously cool things that you can interact with. You can evolve them, change it, evolve all. It's kind of glitching out right now, but overall it's very cool. It's a feature, not a bug. Always. I didn't actually build this or know the person who did. I just think it's really cool. All right. There's also like this guy, Andrew Bryant, who also wrote a really good guide on generative programming or generative art programming. He takes photographs and then he finds ways to just code random things in them. Like in this case, this storm of little black boxes. And there's other stuff too. I learned my lesson. We're not clicking on that one. I'm not tempting. Apparently the person right before me had technical issues. I'm not tempting fate by clicking again. I have a live demo we're doing later. Like that's enough fate tempting. But when looking at all of this, when looking at the history, it's easy to kind of get a little bit overwhelmed. I think a lot of you who came here might want to actually build this stuff yourself. I know I want to at least start building it some days. And sometimes I do. Where do you actually start? So there's a lot of different resources that you should check out. But the first one, and the one we'll be exploring in like 2 seconds, is one of my favorite JavaScript libraries. A lot of you probably have used it. It's P5.js. It makes it really easy to create cute graphics, interactive content for the web. It's really popular for artists and designers because it's incredibly user-friendly, but also really good. You can draw shapes very easily. Barely, like you don't really have to deal with CSS, every programmer's favorite thing. Allows you to manipulate images and even make animations without deeply needing to bang your head against the wall a million times. It's a great tool that allows you to get started really quickly. Oh, a live demo? Well, that's risky. Who would have thought that? All right, so I figured it would only be fun if we picked one of... You can pick which of these we actually look at. It's very basic example projects I made in P5. Which one do y'all want to see? Fireworks. Okay, good. That's the best one, especially because the fireworks they look a little deformed. They look like squids. Look, you'll believe me in a second. Not that. So whenever you click, a firework comes out. But doesn't it kind of look like a squid? A little bit, yeah. But it's a very fast tool. You can make it very quickly. I made this project in like 5 minutes. I mean, I put a lot of time and effort into making this project for you. That is definitely true. I spent so much time coding this. No, it is very easy to make this. And I highly recommend checking it out if you haven't already. Or even if you have already. What's stopping you from using more P5? It's amazing. All right. Other things to check out for generative art. CodePen. There's so many fun examples on CodePen of awesome stuff. Another thing that I really like is Hackster. This is more for when generative art meets hardware, which is one of my favorite things, when you're able to interact with a physical piece that also is that is a physical piece in front of you, but also has some digital component that makes it react with you. On that same note, Instructables is great for that. But what do you actually need to get started? Thanks for asking me. You're welcome, me. There's a lot of different things. Like, the P5 library is really good. Highly recommend that. There's other good libraries too. Like your local library. But that was a terrible joke. You also, like, my favorite thing is when I'm trying to think of a new art project is just looking around at whatever junk I have that I've tried to find an excuse not to throw out and then figuring out something to do with it. Like, if you have an old computer monitor that you haven't gotten rid of because they make you do special things to get rid of them, and who has that time? Like, repurpose it. Put some new put some new hardware in it and use that to make your own frame for your digital art. You'd need like a Raspberry Pi or some sort of hardware for that as well, if you're doing something physical. You'd also need a soldering iron, because anyone who tells you that you don't need a soldering iron is trying to rob you of joy in your life. Also remarkably useful for maker projects are ping pong balls. So that picture up there is one of my favorite maker projects I've ever seen. It's by a YouTuber called BitLooney, who has made like he's made 3 versions, and he's now working on his 4th version, where this is an entire reactive LED wall made out of ping pong balls. Every single one of them acts like a pixel. And they're amazing at diffusing light. It's really fantastic. Other than that, you can get scrap metal, wood, random craft supplies, and a willingness to just break a bunch of stuff. All right, but how do you actually start? Because that is the big problem here. When you look at the vast expanse of a blank page or an idea that you can't really keep hold of, it's kind of tough to actually pick something. And it's not just me. I've talked to a lot of people, especially hardware makers, but artists as well, who have a terrible addiction to buying supplies and never doing anything with them. Like, so many, sure, at the very least, you all know someone who's bought a journal because it had a pretty cover and then never used the journal because it was too hard to think of the thing to write in the first page of the journal. How could you sully it with any old thing? You had to think of the right thing. And that is the enemy to actually getting started. Like, when you actually want to get started with something, you have to give yourself permission to make something kind of terrible. Like, you need to give yourself the permission to make fireworks that look like squids, or or that's my only example. I've never actually failed again before in my life. That would be nice though, right? Step 1, decide what you want to make. Like, you can do this in a lot of different ways. I highly recommend just finding something that looks really cool, starting to follow a tutorial, then diverging from that tutorial horribly so you have to learn how to do it yourself and end up with something completely different to what you actually started to make. It is a fantastic process that only leads to a couple breakdowns an hour. Step 1, decide what you want to make. Step 2, break it down into steps. Either use the tutorial or break it down yourself. Yes, it is very meta that I made that. Why did I put that it was meta in there? I don't know. It was very amusing to me at the time. And step 3, just start building it. Start using the tools in front of you, the garbage you have lined up in your garage or under your desk, or that you've been swearing that you'd take to the charity shop for months and months but haven't. Just start doing it. And if you don't know where to start after that, there's a lot of resources you can check out here. These are some excellent tutorials. Other than that, that's all I have for you. Does anyone have any questions?